Well, hello and welcome back to Carl and Rick Talk Risk. It's been quite a hiatus, Rick. It's been about 3 weeks, I think. First, I was on holiday and you were away for a bit, but we're back and in familiar territory. How are you?
Awesome. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Um, so Rick, today let's talk the hot topic of probability and statistics.
Yeah, woohoo. I mean, goodness gracious, everyone wants to talk probability and statistics. Like, man, you can't go into, hop and bar any place without everyone wanting to talk about probability and statistics.
It's the first thing.
But yeah, both you and I are Formula One fans, right? Formula One it's got it in its name. By the way, I recommend the book The Formula about Formula One, which is about the business of Formula One. But as the book says, it's got the formula in its name. This is a sport that thrives on data and mathematical analysis. So a few weeks ago was the Imola race, a fun race, unlike, the disaster of Monaco. But anyhow, we're going to put Monaco out of mind. But during the pre-race commentary, the um, the announcers, all of whom are experienced Formula One people, including a race engineer who used to do the Monte Carlo statistics for the strategy for the team. And they keep talking about there's 100% probability of a safety car. Bullshit. And not only once, but they kept saying this. And I was going crazy. How can you be so ignorant about the basics of probability and statistics? Okay, if it's 100% probability based upon historical fact, what they meant to say is there's never been a race in which there hasn't been a safety car.
Mm-hmm.
But that is very different, particularly if you're in risk management. That is very different than saying there's 100% probability of a safety car.
Yeah, yeah. I think they're making that age-old taboo of basing future outcomes on past results, right? 100% of past results had a safety car, but that doesn't mean it's guaranteed.
Well, first off, there is confusing the past with history, but again, we all know that it's the best indicator that we have. Yeah. But we got to remember, it's not a perfect indicator.
Yeah.
But the word 100% probability should not exist. The only thing with 100% probability is death and taxes. And the more I read about, certain politicians around the world, and the more I get called in on expert cases, I'm not sure that it's 100% on the taxes. Okay.
Yeah.
But these are people who supposedly should know better. Yeah. And yes, it might be that they actually do know better and they're just playing to their audience. But that brings up the broader fact that the general public, and by the way, a lot of risk professionals and even more, a lot of risk decision makers are in essence ignorant about the basics of statistics and probability. Mm. And it just blows my mind because virtually everything that we do in risk compliance is ultimately based upon probability and statistics.
Yeah.
And people take these probability and statistics as God-given predictions when they are statistics.
Well,
or probabilities.
Exactly. Can I set this one up a bit? Because I'm trying to connect this to something you mentioned before we started recording that I want to get to. There's probably a betting market out there on Formula One. I bet it's pretty big. And and there might even be a bet on whether the safety car is going to come out or not. And if it was 100% probability, there would only be a one-sided bet, right? But I'm sure there isn't. There must be both sides to that. So what I'm getting at is the participants know that one or the other thing could happen, and the odds will show that. That leads me to what you said, Rick. You were telling me about how the Fisher Black model, I believe,
Black-Scholes.
Black-Scholes, I'm sorry, wasn't able to turn a profit against dyed-in-the-wool traders who understood the downsides of the models they were using, log normal returns, constant volatility, and traded in such a way that took into account the flaws in these models. They knew reality better than just trusting in the model and going with the results, which is what the people with Black-Scholes did and weren't able to make it. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Because that is sort of reality butting up against models, right?
Yeah, well, perfect example. So, Fisher Black, in his paper that I wrote, I think for the Financial Analyst Journal, I might be incorrect in that, but it was called How We Came Up with the Option Pricing Formula. And he hints at this, and as do many others who wrote about the history of this, that, excuse me, now when they came up with the formula, you're sitting there, first off, you're the only one in the world that knows how options are priced. People are trading them and people are making and losing fortunes on them, but you're the only one that knows how to accurately price them. So at that time, finance professors weren't paid that well. Now it's kind of flipped a little bit, in part because of the Black-Scholes formula. But what would you do? Is, of course, you would start trading options, right? If you're the only one in the world that knows how they're traded. But there's a thing in the Black-Scholes formula. First off, it assumes that volatility is constant. Secondly, it assumes that volatility is constant across strikes. Actually, it doesn't assume that. It just has to be. How could the volatility in any logical world not be constant across different strike prices?
Right.
Okay, particularly again, because you have to remember it's a forward-looking model. Anyhow, as Fisher Black hints in his article, they didn't keep trading for too long because, of course, they weren't successful. Now, here, what you have is you have a group of traders, many of whom have never finished high school, or if they did, they only finished high school because they cheated on their math exams. No offense to anyone in Chicago. I love Chicago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, so you have to remember, we're going back to the 70s here, folks. Different time, different place, whole different scenario. And, as I joke, they used to have to take off their shoes and socks to count to 10. Okay. And, but here you have these traders who are using the formula, but they're doing something very perverted to it. In other words, they have a volatility scale. In other words, they put in a fudge factor for the volatility when, the strike price isn't near the at the money price. So this group of ignorants, mathematical non-geniuses, basically beat out the geniuses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, we can fast forward, a couple of decades, and of course, we get the long-term capital management. And with long-term capital management, of course, we have, again, Fisher Black by this time, unfortunately, has passed away, but we have, Myron Scholes, Bob Merriweather, and a whole crew of experts. And of course, that becomes basically the first time that anyone ever heard of a hedge fund, and not for any of the right reasons, is they basically blew up using the Black-Scholes option pricing formula. So Myron Scholes really wasn't that bright, was he? Because he blew up, as Fisher Black hints, back in the 70s, and furthermore blew up again in the knots or late 90s, I guess. I'm terrible with history. Yeah, kind of fun times. But this shows what happens when you confuse statistical and probability-based distributions for fact, when you assume that history is going to repeat itself into the future without any other outside influences and with complete um, ability to replicate itself. And yeah, it just bugs me.
Yeah.
Bugs me.
It's a, it's a fascinating example, I mean, these are many of the people who created these models that are so, prominently used everywhere, and in applying them couldn't compete for long anyway.
Let's take another version. Okay,
Mm.
I challenge our reader or our listeners, I guess I should say readers, until my bias for rating. I challenge our listeners to do a quick little survey. Go outside of your house or apartment, and the next 10 people you meet, ask them to explain what Bayesian analysis is to you. Or just very simply ask them, what's Bayesian analysis, which of course is another part of this. And Bayesian analysis, of course, is a key part of AI and the probabilistic models that we have, such as ChatGPT. And this is something that we basically know nothing about. This is why we get so upset about medical tests. We hear the medical test has a 95% probability of detecting whether or not you have a certain condition. And we immediately assume that we test positive, that we have a 95% probability of having that condition, which is anything but what the test says. Okay? Particularly if it's a rare disease or a relatively rare disease, then your actual probability of having that condition is probably much, much lower than 95%. And yeah, I've ranted. I've got to
Yeah.
know the system.
Well, I wanted to give us one weird example of humans being able to intuit stuff better than machines and processes sometimes. And I'll actually look for the article and add it to the description so that I don't misquote anything. It was about Japanese chicken sexers. And these are people that, with a baby chick in hand, can detect whether it's male or female because they have very different paths in life from an early age. And they tested these chicken sexes, and their rate of correctly determining the sex of the chicken was far, far higher than the machine at doing this, of any other way of doing this. And so, they wanted to automate the process and, uh, remove just, people standing in the line doing this work. And they couldn't, because people are far more accurate. And, they actually asked the sexes, what are you doing? Like, we can automate it if we know what you're looking for. They couldn't explain. They couldn't explain. There was some sort of intuition that they had as they're sexing a chicken, that they knew exactly what it was. They didn't really know why. So anyway, I know that's a very random example, but I
Yeah,
thought,
but actually, I think it's very important. First off, to anyone who's interested in something like that, I strongly suggest that you read Kurt Vonnegut's first novel, Player Piano, in which it's kind of centered, written in the early 50s, written in 1952, I think. And it's written about where we basically try to mechanize the world, and he describes a world very similar to how we make video games in the early noughts, of a world where basically you put the dots and the machine reads how the worker does the dots, and then it creates the robot to do it. And Kurt Vonnegut was way ahead of his time, with this novel. And now, of course, how the novel turns out, I'll leave for readers. But your point about the chicks, and this is going to be key with AI, and this, of course, is what my upcoming book is about. That's the difference between something that is complicated and complex. Now, I believe that AI is going to take a lot of the stuff that we currently believe is complex. And by the way, for those who aren't familiar, I'm using complex in the system science things away. So it's adaptive complex systems I'm talking about, not simply something that's difficult. But AI is going to take some of the stuff that we think is complex and actually show us that it's complicated. But I think what we're also going to learn is some of the stuff that we think is complicated, i.e. can be done by a robot or done by an efficient algorithm. We're going to learn that a lot of that is surprisingly going to be complex.
Right.
And AI can beat humans at complicated stuff each and every day. Humans can beat AI at complexity each and every day as well, because AI simply cannot handle complexity except by pure dumb luck.
Yeah.
And this again, albeit in a circuitous route, brings us back to why in this age of AI, where things are being increasingly separated into complicated tasks done by AI, complex tasks done by humans, that's why it's more important than ever to truly understand probability and statistics. Because if something has 100% probability, there is no need for a human to deal with it. Give it to AI.
Nice. Rick, you did it. We started at that. We made a very circuitous route, and we ended there. Well done.
Man, I'm always running in circles.
You stuck the landing.
Oh, man, that must mean there's a hole in the floor then.
Well, it's been good talking. Carl and Rick talk risk. Come here for your book recommendations, parenting advice, and a little about complexity and complicated processes. Thanks again, Rick. We'll talk to you again soon.
Have fun, everyone.